Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Desk Session 91. Moving in. I think I need a new thumbnail. Wow. I haven't concocted one, or I don't have one in the chamber, so I'm going to have to keep figuring that out. Or I have beta tested all of them and I like the one I have. I doubt that's the case because I am makeshifting most of this stuff, and also finding out the hard way whether or not I'm doing things right, or if efforts are productive, or if I'm in the right format, or I'm using the right equipment. A lot of this probably should have been sorted out within 90 to 100 eps, but I mean, again, from what I've gathered, from what I've heard, things that are on the airwaves or at peak attention getting, other than obviously platform people then re-platforming in different media, 100 is just sort of the sample size of, seeing if you want to do this, continue with this. And part of what today is about, for sure, and yet last week for sure, and the continuing effort of doing this when it starts to veer off from its original intention. Not so much that we knew that it's, again, I have a very good friend, and I don't know if he came up with it, but he often refers to NIOPS. NIOPS is the negative influence of other people, right? And a sort of vivid memory flooded me, this pre-taping reverie, thinking about times when I frame things, and especially in the show, the one-man show, and in things I guess I wish I'd have known sooner, even in writing my book and in my stand-up, was it's the things of the light and the dark. And I respond to dark material sometimes because that resides in me. And I clamor or run toward the light, like I think sort of any surviving person who wants to, not give in to the darkness that does surround us. And obviously contrast, and you can't have light without dark. You can't have, colors of the palette, and there are darker hues and lighter hues, but light and dark as both, a figurative and literal manifestation of how I see this and how I want to pursue what I'm doing. And the one good thing that hindsight, or looking back, like I spoke about last week, that I don't, the real reason I am autobiographical in most of my work is just because that's the only thing I can have some certitude. I guess you can't ever have certitude about past events, and you have, your word has to be taken. Other people may disagree or may not have the same assertions. A few times in my life, people have thrown quotes from me back to me. You said a long time ago, and hopefully a lot of them were helpful, but a lot of them were a little too much truth without being proffered or prompted. And the things that kind of got through on people, meaning like I said something and I don't remember saying it. It wasn't a core memory. And in most cases, my wish for how things were is I hope I was consistently the way I sort of feel at my core today. I hope that was present in my youth, because a lot of the time you hope you didn't owe people apologies, or that you were consistent in because if you try to live, and one thing I was privileged to, and now I have to reframe it, the one thing I was privileged my whole life I was afforded the opportunity to sort of live for my art and to live in that space, that very, I don't want to say impractical because that's a judgment. I think if we're feeling all of this angst about the current state of things, the encroachment of doom, the hopelessness of the youth culture that has been warped, if art isn't at very least offering solutions, then what's the point? So I've been in the privileged position to have my art and sort of maybe impractically live in the clouds or in the... I've had to kind of come up with an ethic of my own, an ethos. And it turns out, that it is with a religious ardor, to be honest with you. And I talk about it in my show, but if you're an actor, this is why I don't like politics coming out of our actors or theater people's mouths, although it can come out in the work, and that's probably the line I would draw. Clifford Odets was a probably left-leaning, communistic, Waiting for Lefty and Golden Boy. So his politics were on stage in his plays, and that is, I think, a valid use of your voice. But when an actor or a writer pontificates, then maybe that's not. And I don't want to get into it. And but I will say that the ethic of theater, being a man of the theater, a woman of the theater, a man of letters. Yes, it's not bridge building and tunnel digging and house framing and things like that. We need both, right? That would be when people get all surly and they start feeling invalidated by whatever cultures come head to head like two rams, the blue collar guys, like, we keep this country rolling. And that's 100% correct. And then a banker says, well, without capital, right? So it's all of that, and it's really people wanting to be validated and blurring the lines of personal, professional, blurring the lines of affirmation and self-esteem, and everybody losing the big picture, meaning it takes all of us. And not everyone is suited for everything, and neither is better or worse, right? And then, of course, if you think about surviving in the woods, or why the apocalyptic shows like, the Dawn of the Dead or whatever it might be, Fear of the Living Dead, or any of the dystopian things, it's, what do you do when the lights go out, when civilization collapses, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of people would say, what would you bring to the community if, and probably low on the list after a bomb or something like that, or any of these things, probably low on the list would be, I'll do a monologue. I get that. I do get that, but I'd have to look it up, and I don't want to waste time today. But the word enthusiasm is, I think there is a Latin root that it is, there's a divinity flowchart that there is, its literal translation from the Latin has something to do with like keeping a godly spirit as you define him, right? And so getting back to the theater being ritualistic, and this is all the pedantic stuff that non-theater people don't vibe on, but, I think there's a through line for every endeavor. Pride in framing a house, a true right angle, a level porch, stairs being symmetrical, the true level and the true right angle, that is definitive, and I think divinely sort of ordered. And when you've heard of, I think it's probably an antiquated term, but like when you were a member of the Thespian Society in high school, which was, in my time, wasn't called that either. It was the drama club, or forensics, or if you were in speech and debate, or if you were just a theater nerd, or in the choir and all that stuff. But they used to call that the thespians. meaning, and who Thespis was, that's where it comes from. Thespis was a chanter. I guess I would think it was like, oddly enough, DeGregorio, Gregorian chants, I think might be where that comes from. And you hear that sort of cloistery, echoey in these halls of worship where they, that like those reverent Latin choir incantations. That band in the late 80s, early 90s, Enigma, they had that, they sort of like had a house trip-hop beat on a Gregorian chants vibe. That's probably where the modern person will refer to that sound I'm talking about. And Thespis, from how I recall it or how I have lived by it, he decided to break out of the circle, the chorus, stand in the middle and like kind of jam. He was kind of feeling it, and soloing. And I think part of the lore and part of the retelling of it is that he was moved by the spirit, if you will, to then go out on his own and perform through a channel, and it created this idea that he was the first thespian, the first performer, the first actor. This stuff goes all the way back. I used to wear a chain around my neck with Saint Genesius, and he's hard to find anything about. But Saint Genesius is the patron saint for actors. But if you look him up, he's known as Saint Genesius the comedian. And I used to do a joke about what his miracles were, about how he opened up for Buddy Hackett in the 50s, or he wrote the first dick joke, or whatever the setup was. So for me, whether I knew it at the time or not, but that draw, while fame and riches and being Eddie Murphy or Tom Cruise, and I was drawn to the esprit de corps, not similar to military, but there is a discipline in theater, and there is a feeling of home to people who find themselves there. And one of the things that has made it difficult for me is I used to straddle, and maybe still do, high and low, or outcast and establishment values. So my first encounters in heavy, serious theater training was that I was out of step with the theater geeks because they were geeky and didn't vibe off of my wanting to play basketball, or nary the twain shall meet. And then as you morphed into the career, there's room for different people. But in that early stage of what you're drawn to and lines being drawn, I was an outsider until I decided to really embrace the ethos of the show must go on, and learn your lines, be in service to the play. What is all this stuff. And I took it very seriously. And so I say that to say that it's probably a source of my faith, to be honest with you. And if the people I admired in music, Bruce, U2, certainly R&B artists, all come from, in U2's case, like a Catholic Christian background. Bruce, a Catholic Christian background, but R&B and soul music certainly came from the Black church tradition. And so those swirling choruses and epic sort of anthemic things, and With or Without You, and I Will Follow, or any of the imagery, I think that dovetailed very well into the theater. And obviously things that get further away from the source, and you can't get much further away from the source than like before Christ, you know what I'm saying, or right after, or whatever. So I understand why things have more, and then of course actors in Elizabethan time and before were gypsy vagabonds and troubadours and outside of society, and maybe it's going back that way because there is a current backlash with the debauchery and the low morals of a lot of entertainment. But I would say that is true in every industry, and I would hope to try to be maybe an exemplar of that kind of counter narrative, although I probably fall into that with my cursing and my previous years of partying, and I don't want to really be any kind of flag bearer for virtue, but my only input toward that is that most actors are earnest people and who are willing to live in the faith of a dream without the reward, and often master many different career paths and other ways to stay afloat. And they are often very highly competent people. And, obviously you want to, the dream as a kid, or, when you hear the theory, like, you want to work for the toy department, and not everybody gets to do that. And then, so when blue collar people who clearly don't work in the toy department, they resent people that have what are deemed highfalutin, unimportant artistic jobs or media jobs, or jobs where your basic competency is debatable. And I think the internet's sort of good for exposing some of the gatekeeping and exposing a lot of that. I don't want to get into that per se. But I also think that some of the idea that there is a democratization online is not always true. That these things automatically default to similar overlays of power and might is right and things like that. And a life in the theater, or a life as an actor, or who gets to the top positions, is both by will and good fortune and talent. But there are a fair amount of people toiling in anonymity that are knock your socks off artists, and won't see their place in the sun, except for they love it and they get to do it. And certainly, as I struggle to figure out where my place will be, you start to debate the sacrifices. I'll leave it at that. And I think it also comes down to losing enthusiasm and things getting commodified. And so something like Hamnet, I don't know how it will stack up in the future as a well-remembered film. But that was the one this year, and I've mentioned it before, but that reminded me, it really reminded me. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that I have to summon up some more enthusiasm in the face of indifference, in the face of challenge, and to get that divine spark back, And I'm making some efforts to do that. And I guess in the revision of it's a revision of my spirit, to be honest with you. I spend a lot of time thinking about the movies. And I know now vividly that it was the happy accident of my birth and the era in which I was born and the supremacy of the moving picture industry's hold on culture, and my dad having Friday nights off and taking me to the movies. And so I have lamented about my birth order and my family being difficult or trippy. But now I guess I had attention on me. I had them to myself. And it was a Friday night thing to see the movies. And so if you listen to a lot of these movie podcasts I do, they harken back to an age from, like, let's say 77, 75 through, 90. There are some touchstone films, and it's a Bill Simmons, The Ringer. He's a pop culture juggernaut, and he's made an empire, and he does Sports First is where he broke in, but he's written for all kinds of comedy outlets and pop culture and film, and he's got multiple podcasts that are about these films, and we are of a similar age. And so, you know, the beauty of being able to have seen these things in the movies, you know, in the theater, and, you know, in our own way and in his way, me on the listening end and him on the producing end, you know, we're trying to preserve this thing in the midst of, you know, he speaks of his kids can't make it through old movies without being on their phones, you know. And I'm trying to keep it alive because I want to play in the toy department and bring my art to the world that I've worked on for so long. And that's, you know, that's where I'm at. I had an audition and I had to do an Irish accent, which I can't do off the cuff. I do it when I transpose the script in phonetics, and I remember the sound. I've talked about this before, but I had to do it. And then it was also like it's in the 1920s kind of gangster genre, and he was an Irish guy in his 50s that had to have, and so like there's a little bit of a I thought there was maybe a nuance to the accent because he'd been in America for so long, but he, you know, to have the Irish, you know, and there's varying degrees of how much of the, what do they call it, the brogue will you have. And so, and they were long scenes, and you know, it's a bummer that you send them out into the abyss and you don't get any feedback, you know. And if I fell short on the dialect and could have been bolstered by a further work with the accent coach, or if they wound up hiring a native Irishman, I'm sure that was more like it. But you just don't know. But you also, you know, you want to join the pantheon of great actors and your training, and you want to be able to see if you measure up. But that was, I guess, a status report of the week previous. And I guess I'm a little bit stymied in I vacillate between this show has to go because I have something to say, and then it vacillates between that and the problem with social media, again, being you are inviting the NIOPS into your heart. And so one of the vivid stories I had is in New York in the 90s, in the bar culture, there were bars that went till 2 a.m., and those were usually attached to restaurants. You know, very rare was a restaurant that would probably close at 12 or 11. I worked at a 2 a.m. close restaurant, and the legal restaurants and bars are able to stay open till 4. So, and occasionally you sneak out early, but a lot of my social life happened between 2 and 4. And seeing people after hours and things like that. And as much as there are negative influences of other people, NIOPS, and, you know, that's what I've been seeing a lot of, like, and it's all in the name of comedy, but, and I'm just noticing it because I have a one-man show, but there's a lot of, like, mocking of the one-man show, and there are these sort of young adult dramedies all over streaming and stuff where the punchline is, oh my god, I was invited to a friend's, you know, play reading, and it's like, you know, these are and I laugh because it hurts, because yeah, those are god awful sometimes, and very rarely are they revelatory, and most of the time they are obligatory, or you're trying to show support, and you hope that you don't fall into that category, so you laugh, and you but everybody who's seen Waiting for Guffman, if they're honest, Waiting for Guffman, the great Chris Guest's troupe, I think that's the best one, although people would argue, but because that one touches home. Everybody's been in a production that's just like a hair better than what they're after in that show, and it's about like a community theater, and it's painful but funny. And so, but I also now with Instagram and Reels and stuff, there are people who the thespians have found their niche on social media. So, Carnegie Mellon, you'll see all the Carnegie Mellon Theater Award people and the Tonys and all the people that are on Broadway, and then that gets my algorithm flowing these people who are like, and a lot of times there's a guy who does the mocking of my impersonation of blank and a one-man show. And it's like, I send it to my buddy who's been very helpful and, helped me get my reading together and encourage me, actually asking about it more than I am thinking about it, because I'm starting to lose enthusiasm and forward thrust. And so when he's the one who is mentioning what's the latest with that, what are you working on now, what's your next step, that's a lucky friend to have. And so, but the NIOPS, the negative influence of other people, that is now coming through, and I'm piping it in on my phone. And the contrast to that is, if you have to be blessed with a support system that is not that is a bolstering, a buttressing support group, and that's primarily why people stay in acting classes, is to have that community, to have that "you're so great" thing, which may be a false prop up, but really isn't, because when you're cooking in class, and it's really hard to sustain without work. It's probably why I jump ship from agent to agent, because the more effusive and the more enthusiastic agent is the one that is a cheerleader and an admirer of your work. That's where I went. And it may have just been not enough contact with the other. I had no animus toward the old one, and it's also just to shake it up. And so you have to fight the NIOPS, the negative influence of other people. But this vivid memory about something happening at 4 o'clock in the morning is, I used to work in a bar, and there were people, when you're the bartender, there's always this sort of back and forth with the wait staff, and when you're a young man, there are waitresses and waiters, but there's mostly waitresses, and bartenders were male, and in this particular instance, I spoke a while back about looking at the script to find what people say about you or your character is a really good indicator. And so you sort of reverse engineer. If you hear that someone walks with a slump. I wish, if somebody says, "Man, he would be he would be so much more attractive if he didn't slouch." You read that 6 pages and your character's not in the thing. I think the detective work there says that your character has bad posture, right? So blah, blah, blah. That's a brutal example, but that's essentially what it is. And this goes back into the light and the dark. So I had a dark situation. I had a relationship that was probably in the dark part of my existence at that time. And I was a shit talker, and I liked to hold court. And one of the things that is good about the restaurant business or the bar business is it's a more permissive work environment in terms of there's live music, there's drinking. Like you don't have the same, until they've ruined it with HR, but you don't have the same decorum issues in a restaurant that you do have to adhere to in an office space, which is why, thankfully, knock on wood, I haven't worked. I'd be a bull in a china shop in an office space, not because I'm a objectionable person. It's just that I have yet to have been confined by that, and my training in theater is permissive, but it's a lot of self-determined people, which is another thing that you would admire about actors rather than denigrate. They're all self-determined people. They may be ego-driven, but they also all wanted to do this, and they find themselves in the pecking order. But everybody in a production of a play or in a show, put together an audition at one point, And then if they're the leads and they're the people who have careers, that they kind of lucked into that, or they willed it, And so it's sort of like being in the gym. You don't talk to a lot of people, but you can't say anybody in there is not on a self-improvement tip that moment, that time. We're all there to stay in shape. And yeah, you can say that it's vanity to flex in the mirror, but that's the payoff for being strong, But I'm going into like things that I'm hearing now and it's not to say things to humble brag about nice things being said in the past that are hearsay according to me, right? It's not to do that. It's to remind myself what other people can do for you, what other people can say to you. And I remember vividly one night at the end of a night, some event had happened, and I heard a waitress say, let's go over to Carl and talk to him. Let's go sit over at the bar and talk to Carl because he's got a really good life force. I remember hearing that. And I used to joke that I want my nickname to be Life Force. And so that was a quote that I plucked out of the air and put in my memory. So that must have been giving off some vibe. And then there were people who've, because you're from New Jersey and you shit talk, and I guess I'm a chatty person to the TV. I've also been told that when I shit talk TV and make fun of the commercials and stuff, or the talking heads on the TV, I had someone say you're very negative because I like to talk shit. So, I've had good and bad feedback, but I'm gonna choose to lean into the ones that were hearkening to when I was in the light and it was met with a observant person, or when things were clicking and people noticed. So that was a thing like we had at some bars. They don't have that anymore, but like some bars had like you get a shift drink, And so that would be like what some of the waitresses would get off early. It was slow. They'd sit at the bar. The bar was always going to be open. And so you get the kibitz with the wait staff. People want to hang out. A lot of people want to get the fuck out and go hit the streets, or just some people were real disciplined and had to work at the next day in the morning because they were moonlighting. And so, you would get both energies at the bar. But that's where I heard, let's go sit over by Carl. He's got a good life force. Similarly, a place that was a 4:00, and in the early 90s, Alphabet City was not gentrified and not a safe place, not a great place to be kicking it down after 2 a.m. But of course, that's why I went down there. I had a buddy who worked in a bar, and there were these two dive bars he used to be a bartender at, and they were, down on Avenue B or Avenue C or something like that. And welcome to Carl DeGregorio's desk. We're talking about people who, just different vibes. Upper West Side, you jump in a cab, you drive all the way down to Alphabet City to go see my buddy after 2, and then he would keep it open because he was the bartender. He locked up, and we would hang out all night. And I used to bring a tape recorder because I was trying to will myself into some creative thing, and it's eventually how my play started to exist on these tape recorders, those little micro cassette, note to self kind of shit. And it was straight up cassette at the time. And I just put it on the bar and we would shoot the shit. And then I would hear one-liners coming out of my mouth. It's also probably the genesis of where I knew I could be a stand-up, because I was quick and I was verbally agile. And I would say dead-on zingers that were essentially what I know now were punchlines and tags. But in one of these conversations, we were talking about, he knew me from drama school. He was a writer who had seen me in stuff, and he had his other bartender, and it's not rare to find other actors behind the bar commiserating about the career. But Eddie, my friend, was not pursuing that, so he was able to be he was pursuing the writing end of things, so he wasn't competitive, let's say, and just a special kind of guy with a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of life force. So I was complimented that I had the life force. I took that compliment as a wow. And then I literally, just realizing now, I wanted to go tap into a life force of my friend at late hours. And the conversation was something about something, and we would always talk about, how's it going? I'm struggling. I lost my agent, whatever it might have been. And his partner said something about like, oh yeah, well, we were, we were all going to be something else or something. He said like one of those NIOPSing, commiserating, like self-defeatist, like back when we had a chance, or one of those really harsh things that was what might be a projection. And my buddy said, no, you don't know. This guy really should have, gotten somewhere by now. And it was both thanks, man, and also like, fuck, how far have I fallen? But that's the opposite of a NIOPS. He was being a positive person. He shot down somebody else. So those are two examples. And all I'm saying is those popped into my head in the shower. And, hopefully you have a collection of thousands of those things. And what's really hard is when you either you have too much familiarity with someone, and that's the other lament, right? You'll hear a compliment from somebody, and your girlfriend will say, I've been saying that to you every day for the last 20 years. And you have to remember that, and this is what I'm talking about the light and the dark, is if I remember things with the dark lens, I can dig that stuff up, and that may be a default setting for humans, but certainly for me, I can only speak for myself. But my efforts to bring the light to the forefront and to change where I want to spend my time, it's become a gratitude toward those people who aren't the darkness. I want to live in the light, and you just want people not to throw a blanket. That's a wet blanket, right? But you don't want people throwing a blanket over your light, rock, paper, scissoring your light. And light is powerful, right? There's the love versus hate, the light versus the dark, which one's stronger? And they say the light's stronger, but if you just throw a fucking giant blanket of negativity over something, that'll do it, and then it's a wrap. And so what I'm trying to do is trying to be grateful and excited and like get my enthusiasm back up that I'm still in it, and you can't fail if you don't quit, right? And so, that's what I'm telling myself now, and that I have this little opportunity, this chance, and that, and I put everything I had into that Irish accent and that gangster thing, and then it dawned on me in this effort to recalibrate, work with the new age. I had to send a lot of the people who I resemble, and so I've sent a list of current guys that are working, but then there's also like I'm a younger version of guys who are now cycling out of life, and so and will we miss the Gandolfinis, the Ray Liotas, the Danny Aiellos, the Jack Wardens, the Walter Matthau's, all of these, Robert Loggia, like these guys are probably guys that I wanted to be like, but when I was in my teens and my dad saying you could be like Robert Loggia or whatever, I'm like, yeah, but I look like I should be on 90210 or whatever. And now I'm kind of getting into those august roles, and I just hope that archetype still exists. Things are different. They're not looking for that archetype. That archetype, may have gone the way of the dodo bird. I hope not. But, there are people who are in their 20s who need people to play their pops or their grandpops. And so there's still what I'm hanging on to. And I'm trying to stay in the light of remembering random times I was complimented out of sheer people seeing the light, and I can't claim to have responsibility for it. That's the other thing. Shooting down compliments is not cool. It doesn't make you humble. It means it's you telling you didn't have anything to do with why you were being received that way. It's to me, and not to freak anybody out, but it's divinity coming through you, and people who are, not NIOPSes see it and say, I see it. And you just say thank you. That's all. And then remember that it's in you, and that's why you vibe on certain people, because you're seeing each other's light. You're seeing each other's divine spark, if you will. And I think that's why the theater, and you find crummy bum jerk-offs in theater too. It's not like everybody's dope. It's pretty much along the lines of life itself. But there is something magical about making magic as an actor. I wish more actors would get out of the status game and back into the, doing what we do game. And, but that's because we have to make a living, and then status is the only measure in our culture, And, I'm trying to navigate my way through that and remember the light and the times that I was representing as a life force, because that's all you do on stage, right? Is you stand in the middle, which is asking for people to stare at you. And you're going to stand in the middle, and you're going to say something, and you're going to look out, and you're going to pour all that life in. And that beacon is a two-way street, and it's back and forth between you and the audience. But the actor is the thespis who says, I dare to receive and give. And it's a back and forth thing. And, I don't know what that has to do with the internet or social media. There are some bright lights out there. I guess you got to find them. They're harder to find because you'll lay in the darkness. But there is, and so when my tolerances are different. They're not that I'm less tolerant. It's just that I know what those NIOPS can do to you, and I know what the darkness feels like. And it's not so much that I don't have love or I don't have sympathy or empathy. It's just I'm too sensitive to navigate those waters, And so I have to, and maybe that's the maturing, is you try to find those people who, are a port in the storm, because life has got storms, And ultimately you have to be your own port in a storm, and that's these listicles you'll see all over self-realization stuff online, realize that no one's coming to save you. That's what they're referring to, and it's true. You have to be the calm in the storm, and that's a scary thing. And probably some of my reticence and where I'm at is I forgot that, but that does require you to be brave, and it requires you to be a leader for yourself, And I think that can hurt your acting, and that's why I felt really good about that audition this week. Is I think I was like a leader, because I really put a lot into it. I took the extra time. I learned the lines. I learned the dialect. I was doing the Irish thing, but it was real, like a subtle, And people forget it's not just the R's, it's the and. You got to say and it's about the there's different vowels and diphthongs that lead you to sound Irish, because it's not Irish, it's Irish, and the great in the name of the Father, I watched my father die for something he didn't do, like that I'm walking out the front, I'm a free man and I'm walking out the front door, that's more like, and that's kind of what I was channeling. And it was exciting, and it was fun, and it's on the digital equivalent of on the bottom of the pile. And what can you do? I guess you just got to remember that you can do it. And I'll be ready. I'll be ready when that window opens, or when that crack in the door opens. And I'm willing now to be brave enough to put my foot through the fucking door and not let it shut. And to know it doesn't mean I'm not a good person or a bad person, whatever. I have to remember I'm mostly lucky. And so luck begets luck, I suppose. Work begets work, and I'm not going to give back a privilege of talent, whatever the privilege is, tall privilege or talented privilege or life force privilege or bartender privilege or whatever it was. Nobody else is giving back those advantages, and I don't need to wear ankle weights anymore emotionally. So that's kind of what was on my heart and my mind this week. I hope it seemed like I was a little more prepared because I thought about it today. And I think it's the reinvestigation of a lot of these podcasts about films and reminding the structures and stuff and the lessons they teach. And that's where I think some of the answers are, because the the answers are in the solutions come from the artist, not the arts per se, but the artist. And that could be a broad arts and sciences, the sort of solution based thinkers. They say that science figures out what's possible, then the engineer puts it into the real world. So I think like the artist is sort of the Imagineer, and that's what they call them at Disney, right? They're Imagineers. And we have to remember that as artists, that we, if we're sick of all the crap that's out there, then it's not gonna, the system isn't gonna change it. It's gonna be the maverick artist, or the maverick developer, or the maverick scientist. So anyway, keep it going. We got to get to the song this week. I'm blanking on it because I looked at it earlier to avoid this moment. We had Tanita Takaram. That'll be in the description. That cathedral song. That was the great development of the last week, the song. And I'm probably gonna have this fucker while I'm scrolling. I'm gonna have it before I get to it, but yeah, right. Oh yeah, so the song on this week's list, this will be a little bit dad rocky. This will be a little basic bitch, but again, I've often said that my measure for good pop music, good rock, or whatever, is that it's slightly embarrassing to be caught like vibing out to, and that little freedom of prancing and dancing, or being that sentimental or that vulnerable. That's why love songs work, is because you hear a man let it out when you never saw your dad do it, or you never saw your uncle do it. But then you hear these love songs, and these are surrogates for your own feelings. But this week's song on the all-time list is Bruce Hornsby, who is my second favorite Bruce, I would say. Bruce Hornsby, it's Every Little Kiss, which isn't the big hit. He's had, I guess it would be the third hit. Bruce Hornsby is known for That's the Way It Is, famously covered, or famously sampled by Tupac. He's a brilliant musician, Mandolin Rain would be the other one, but Every Little Kiss is the one I like, or at least that found its way on my ever long list. It's musical. I know that's we've talked about what theatrical is and what cinematic is, and then what is musical. And I think this is a musical song. You'll hear the rhythm and the melody and the plunking and the sort of pocket that is created by his great band and by him. And Every Little Kiss is just it's a love song about that's Ask Me What I'll Miss, and it's Every Little Kiss. And it's great music. He's one of the few people whose piano has a sound similar to like Eddie Van Halen's guitar has a sound. You can tell Bruce Hornsby is on the keyboard, and that's hard to do because the keyboard is kind of a true sound that doesn't have tone, but he somehow, whatever key he picks or how hard he hits or his chord choice, and he's been on so many, he co-wrote songs for Shaka Khan. I Love You Now, Do You Love Me Still? He plays piano on that. Which is a harp. You can get through that song without tears, that Shaka Khan song. He's the piano accompaniment on that. And that's a dope dude who's like down with Shaka Khan, and then he's kind of a corny classic rock guy. Played with the Grateful Dead, not my favorite, but like he's on the end of the Innocence with Don Henley. It's definitely of an era, but man, what a musician. And if the songs stand the test of time for me, and musicians and songs and recorded music is forever, so it may be played out, but check out Bruce Hornsby's Every Little Kiss, any Bruce Hornsby really, and Tanita Takaram, she'll be in the description. And I'll see you next week. This was Carl D, Death Session 91. Peace.